Let me get straight into my presentation this morning, and then after Mr. Mark will join me. And I want to welcome the media that is here today, this morning. This morning, in my short presentation, it is really to continue the story about this heartless government and uncaring lack of concern that this Prime Minister Rowley and his government has shown towards the families of this Paria tragedy that took place. And I think it would be in 1 month's time, sometime in the latter half of the third week in February, that we'll be celebrating, not celebrating, but we'll be 2 years that this tragedy took place. I think it was on the 25th of February, 2022. So we are just coming up onto 2 years. What we witnessed in the Parliament on Friday at Prime Minister's question time was another heartless display by Prime Minister Rowley and his government. On Friday the 26th of January, it's something in the standing order, the second session in the month. It's called Prime Minister's question time. And I had filed a question along with other colleagues on Friday. And part of the standing orders in the Parliament is that the Prime Minister is supposed to get up and respond to questions that are approved by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. These questions that we pose are then, we pose it and we send it to the Parliament. The Parliament approves these questions. And the Prime Minister must answer these questions. So we had filed 7 questions on Friday, and all 7 were approved by the Speaker of the House and the Parliament. And one of the questions I had filed, coming out of the Commission of Inquiry report that was laid by Prime Minister Rowley, I think it was laid by Minister of Energy Stuart Young, a week ago, coming out of the report, this 525-page or 501 pages report, and I went through the entire report. I filed a question, and the question, I want to just put it on the record here this morning. The question I had filed in Parliament at Prime Minister's question time, and I quote, "Given that the final report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Paria tragedy recommended that compensation be given to the families of the victims who were involved in this fatality without accepting liability," and I want to just repeat that, without accepting liability. And I asked, will the Honourable Prime Minister state if the government has considered offering compensation either through Paria or other avenues to the affected families on behalf of the state? Well, brother, I don't know who tell me to ask that question to the Prime Minister. The way the Prime Minister got on Friday to just answer a simple question that was asked by King's Counsel Lynch in this report. This question that I had posed on Friday was not the opposition question. It was not David Lee question, the Member of Parliament point up here, that this disaster happened. It was the King's Counsel Lynch question on page, I have it here. On page, page 284 of the report. And in that part of the report is called the treatment of families, And that part of the report, recommendation 39 by King's Counsel Lynch, his recommendation, or the Commissioner's report recommendation, and I want to quote it. They state in recommendation 39, lastly, in situations where families have had their loved ones and breadwinners snatched away from them in circumstances such as these, meaning the tragedy, or any tragedy, real consideration needs to be given to assisting the families in the immediate aftermath of the incident to help them with the financial burden that they have been catapulted into. This does not have to involve any admission of liability, merely the recognition that the family of those who have died or who have been seriously injured may need help. That is not David Lee's question, and it is not the opposition's question. It is a recommendation in this report by King's Counsel Lynch. And it is part of the report from page 281. And I asked the media to look at those pages 281 to 284, and it is under the heading Treatment of the Families. So I had asked that question. Well, God help me for asking that question. God help me for asking that question. And the Prime Minister went all over the place on Friday in responding to that simple question. And the question we would have thought would have been that they were trying to assist the families in some sort of financial assistance, either through negotiating with the families' lawyers, with the state lawyers or even the cabinet lawyers, to come to some agreement. And as Commissioner Lynch had put it, you do not have to accept liability at that point in time. Now, Commissioner Casey Lynch is a well-respected lawyer, esteemed lawyer, well-experienced, and he was chosen by the same said government. I think on record, Commissioner Lynch had said he's well, he's known to the present Attorney General. It is there reported in one of the dailies before. So it is not the opposition pick of Casey Lynch. It is the government's pick of Casey Lynch. And Casey Lynch, I want to put it on the record, did a fantastic job along with the other commissioner in producing this 501-page report. And it cost the taxpayers over close to $16 million, this report. So we would have thought that on Friday, at Prime Minister's question time, the Prime Minister would have come simply, given the circumstances, given the sensitive situation, and have given us a better response. And everything turned old mass after that. So before I want to get into my presentation, so I just wanted to lay the groundwork there about what happened on Friday. And I want to say, in response to, when I laid the question, and I want to quote, this is the Prime Minister's, in Prime Minister's question time, and I quote, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because the Speaker of the House had recused herself, given that we were talking about Paria. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I quote, this is not a matter for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to just jump in. Now, he was referring to jumping in because I asked about compensation for the families. And I want to say, Trinidad and Tobago, these are the brazen, blunt words of the Prime Minister on Friday. When we in the opposition demanded to know in Parliament if government will be assisting the families of Paria victims, given the recommendations I have said from Commissioner Lynch in the Paria Commission of Inquiry final report. Trinidad and Tobago, what we witnessed in Parliament on Friday, was not the actions of a callous government, but it was a Prime Minister shutting the doors of government in the faces of 4 families who have been living a nightmare for the last 2 years. On Friday, we witnessed a Prime Minister essentially using our Parliament to reject the pain, suffering, and hardship of 4 families whose loved ones perished while doing work for the state. As a member of Parliament for Pointe-a-Pierre, from the very start of this Paria tragedy in February 25, 2022, I have been calling for compensation for these families. That is why at Friday's sitting in the House of Representatives, based on as I said, the recommendation in the final report, I asked the Prime Minister the question. Any caring, compassionate Prime Minister who valued the lives of citizens, who understood the importance of their office and simply understood common kindness, would have responded by telling the nation how they intended to help the families. Instead, what did we get as a nation? We saw a Prime Minister subject 4 families to more trauma with a barrage of cruel excuses, fake requirements for intervention, and baseless reasons for not helping. On Friday, the Prime Minister told the population that there is a process, that the situation is being properly reviewed by a board of pariah. Now let me stop there. This is what the Prime Minister said. The process is being properly reviewed by a board of pariah. And what board is that? The same present board that sat on this tragedy back on February 25th, 2022. 2 years ago, it is the same board, the same management that is now going to review the report by Commissioner Lynch and his recommendations. And they are going to tell this government what are their recommendations and how they propose to or not help the families. The same board led by Chairman Newman George, who is a golfing partner of this present Prime Minister. And we had called during the last 2 years, or during the Commission of Inquiry, we had called on several occasions, the opposition leader had called on several occasions, and myself and other colleagues, where we had asked as a first pass that the board go on leave and there is a new board in place until the findings of the Commission of Inquiry. We had even called for the top management, like Mustaq Mohammed and others who were players in this tragedy, to be sent on leave until the report has been finalized. That did not happen. Because you see, this Prime Minister, from the time any member of the opposition give any recommendation to his government, he doesn't take us on. That's clear. He said that even on Friday in Prime Minister's question time, when the Oropouche member, Oropouche East, Dr. Munilal, had recommended something, the Prime Minister said, I'm not taking you on. I don't care for your advice. That is the style of this Prime Minister. So when the opposition keeps putting things forward for this government to carry our country forward, this Prime Minister and his government and his colleagues said they don't want to hear anything from the opposition. But we will continue doing our work. We will continue to expose what is happening in this country, my friends out there. So this is simply absurd. How can we expect the same pariah board, led by Newman George, to review and deliberate on compensating the families when we couldn't depend on them to assist in the rescue of the divers? Well, that is, how could that be good governance, Mr. Mark? And this government, this present government, talks about they understand what is good governance, good corporate governance. They profess to know it. But this simple thing of having the same board adjudicate on the report, something does not smell correct with that, Mr. Mark. And I would have thought that when this report was handed to the president, and the president delivered this report to the Prime Minister said, with his colleagues, Cabinet reviewed this report before they laid it in Parliament. I would have thought that Cabinet, led by the Honorable Prime Minister Keith Christopher Rowley, would have done the correct thing in governance, and they would have deliberated on this report, Mr. Mark. Even if they had to get lawyers to assist them in deliberating the recommendations of this report, the Cabinet, maybe they might have formed a committee, a subcommittee, to go through the findings of the recommendation of this report, not leave it up to the board of pariah, the same board of pariah that was in place when this tragedy took place, and the management. So could you imagine Newman George is going through this report with Mustaq Mohammed, Colin Piper, Balkisoon, the lady Balkisoon, and we going through this report. And this report is very critical of the management of pariah and the board. And this Prime Minister said, okay, we'll let the process ease. We won't do anything willy-nilly. That's his words. We're not into this willy-nilly thing. We're letting the board of pariah do it. I would have thought that the Prime Minister would have formed a subcommittee, a cabinet subcommittee, headed by maybe not the Minister of Energy, maybe the Minister of Finance, or somebody of that ilk, to really go through the recommendations and see how best they can come up with a policy, whether it is to compensate the families, negotiate with the family lawyers, get new management, get new board in place, but it cannot be business as usual with this report and this present board of PARIA and management. It cannot be. We will not accept it, and this country will not accept it. Now, when the divers, I say, were struggling for air in the pipeline, we couldn't depend on the board and management to help save them. Hence, the reason report demands that there are charges for corporate manslaughter be laid. These are not David Lee words. It is here in this report. Yet you want the same board to decide on compensation. How can you expect PARIA to deliberate on compensation for the families now, when again it was the same PARIA board and management that left these families in the car park, in the rain, in the hot sun, while their loved ones perished? It is in this report. And I ask the media, not just look at the summary in the first couple of pages of the report. Read the entire report. All 501 pages, I have read it. Right? And it is very damning. I want to repeat the findings of the Commission of Inquiry on page 281 to 284. Mr. Mark, you might have to bear with me this morning. Right? 281 to 284. Under the heading Treatment of Families. And I'll just read a couple lines. In the view of the Commission, the way in which the families were treated, and this is not the opposition words, it is in this report. The way in which the families were treated was insensitive and uncivilized. Insensitive and uncivilized. The failure to keep them informed, especially in the first 12 to 24 hours, was shocking, as was their failure to look after them. They should have been provided with basic shelter, basic toilet facilities, and food throughout this ordeal. I remember I was there in that car park with the families, and they were provided with nothing, Mr. Mark. It is because of well-wishers and good Samaritans and other family members pooling that they were able to bring some sort of accommodation. OWTU sent porta toilets, some tents. I know on the Monday after, Dr. Munilal, member for OPE, he sent down lunches for the people who are out there in solidarity. We did our work. We did it. And to think that PARIA, who is making millions of dollars. Now, I want to digress a little bit, Mr. Mark. On Friday, the astute politician that Prime Minister Rowley is, he threw out something in one of the questions about $50 million. And everybody jumped at that. The media jumped at that. I think there's an article in the papers about $50 million. And really and truly, he knew what he was doing. He was deflecting. Prime Minister Rowley was deflecting. So he's trying to throw something on somebody else in this fiasco. He's very good politician. We don't dispute that. So he threw out a figure of $50 million. And the media ran at it. Now, do you know, since PARIA has been formed, now PARIA is a baby of Prime Minister Rowley and this government. They created PARIA when they shut down willy-nilly, the Petrotrin. Willy-nilly. They created PARIA. Now PARIA, all PARIA is supposed to do, Mr. Ma, is that they purchase fuels for our country at a price. They have a monopoly. They sell it to all the gas stations in Trinidad and Tobago, and maybe some CARICOM colleagues they sell to. So they buy fuel, they sell the fuel at a gas station, they make a profit. Very simple. If they made a loss, I would be surprised. But I have checked their financials in PARIA. As at, Mr. Mark, you'll be shocked, as at September 2022 in return earnings, PARIA has recorded nearly over $600 $600 million. In 2022, the same year that this tragedy took place in February. So when Dr. Rowley throws out a $50 million, somebody get $50 million, he should also be telling the country that Paria is very profitable, over $600 million. So that they are in financial good hands to assist these families, Mr. Mark. All right? So, again, the Prime Minister wants the country to believe that the Paria board, who ill-treated these families during this crisis, will suddenly help them. The Prime Minister's decision to simply allow this present Paria board to remain in place and deliberate on the findings of the Commission is not only, in our view, reckless and irresponsible, but is cemented in helping protect his friends at Paria. Paria, again, is a creature of this government. I want, again, Mr. Mark, it is shocking that Trinidad and Tobago, that we are witnessing, what we have been witnessing here is total defiance of good governance in an effort for the Prime Minister to protect his friends and chairman and the management of Paria. It is shocking that the Prime Minister has all of a sudden found some moral compass for respecting independent institutions, Mr. Mark. As he told us on Friday, and I quote, it will be quite unusual at this stage for the government to override the responsibility and role of the board and other entities involved. All of a sudden, Prime Minister found moral compass about in respecting independent institutions. Where was this sense of morality when it was alleged that a senior cabinet official interfered with the merit list to derail Gary Griffith's selection? Where was this sense of morality when the government spent over millions of dollars to engage in alleged witness tampering in the Nelson Vincent matter? Again, Mr. Mark, where was the sense of morality when the government dropped the case against Malcolm Jones for the $1 million wastage that was responsible for the shutdown of Petrotrin? This morning, we call on the country to take note of the double standards of the Prime Minister. Imagine the Prime Minister had the audacity to tell us on Friday, this government, and I quote, cannot just jump in and decide to pay compensation willy-nilly all over the place. This is the same Prime Minister whose government has paid billions in legal fees to lawyers and millions to lawyers. Paria paid close to nearly $9 million so far and counting on this Commission of Inquiry to 2 lawyers. It was there in the Parliament. There was a question that Dr. Munilal asked. Jason Mutu was one of the lawyers and Gilbert Peterson. Now, Jason Mutu fees might have increased because I told in the last few months he became senior counsel, Mr. Mark. So I know those fees would have gone up. Where was the moral compass or the willy-nilly when they wasted hundreds of millions of dollars in Atlantic Train 1, Mr. Mark? They didn't care about willy-nilly when the cabinet shut down Petrotrin. They didn't care about willy-nilly because they didn't leave it up to the board to make a decision to shut down Petrotrin. The Prime Minister Rowley and Stuart Young, and I think Franklin Can at the time, God rest his soul, made the decision to shut down Petrotrin. They didn't leave it up to the board because if you remember, what was the last chairman? Wilfred Esmide. He was shocked when they shut down Petrotrin. He was shocked because they had a restructuring plan in place. But now, when 4 families are struggling to survive financially, we hear about willy-nilly. On Friday, the Prime Minister tried to hide his government's heartless decision of not helping the families behind the Companies Act. He told us on Friday what are they inviting us to do? To jump in over a state company and make compensation from the government? How is that going to be done? That is absolutely misleading from the Prime Minister. The country must not fall for that political, I have some words but I won't say it. The people of Trinidad and Tobago must understand that the failure of this government to provide these families with a single form of assistance has nothing to do with legal processes. It has nothing to do with the Company Act, and it will not even interfere with the liability of the parties involved. So, in conclusion, Mr. Lynch, I think he did a fantastic job in that report, and I really hope that Prime Minister Rowley or his cabinet get some good sense prevail and they move that board, that report from that board, or even in putting an interim board led by a new chairman to adjudicate and to review the Commission of Inquiry's report, Mr. Mark. The Prime Minister has a national duty to act on Paria because the taxpayers have spent over 22 of inquiry so far. Close to 16 million for the commissioners and close to 9 million just alone on Paria legal fees. The Prime Minister has a duty to ensure employees such as Colin Piper no longer being paid by taxpayers. And I raised that question, and I want to raise that question, Mr. Mark. We are asking through this media conference, this press conference this morning, is Colin Piper still employed at Paria in the position that he's still at his senior position when this tragedy took place? Is he still employed and funded by taxpayers of this country? We want to know that. We want to know whether Mustaq Mohammed employment contract was renewed recently along with Colin Piper. We want to know that. This government must come clean. The Minister of Energy must tell us that. They must tell us that. Because it cannot be business as usual, Mr. Mark. It cannot be business as usual. When, Mr. Mark, I want to throw your mind back in 2021. We had a tragic situation where in Maraval in Rookery Nook, 3 children perished in a fire. It was heart-rendering. It was sad. And within days, the Minister of Housing, and I'm very happy for the families, the Minister of Housing at that time was Penelope Beckers, a very good politician and leader, responded by saying an agency home was going to be allocated to them. And we are happy for that. That is how a government should operate. Because we did it when Kamala Persad-Bissessar was in government. Whenever they had a crisis, whether a house burnt or she had Dr. Munir as the housing minister ensuring that they get some sort of allocation or a new home when tragedy took them. And we are not seeing it demonstrated by this Prime Minister in the same way. So we are saying that these families should have gotten something. They should have gotten something. Now, what is interesting, Mr. Mark, and I know for a fact, that Paria has been trying to do a PR job recently. So they have engaged UWI to do a survey to see and the survey basically saying, tell us what are the hardships being suffered by the families and the fence line communities due to the shutdown of Petrotrin. So they are trying now, I don't know if election is in the air, Mr. Mark, but Paria has now engaged a consultant to come up with a survey of what is the hardship that is taking place to families since the shutdown of Petrotrin. They have also, what they have done in the last few months, they have been giving out school bags without any books, with their logo Paria throughout Pointe-a-Pierre. Now, that is hundreds of dollars, hundreds and thousands of dollars. And you would have thought that as a first pass, they would have ensured even the books of the children of these families, the divers, they would have taken care of that without any liability, as something as simple as that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have some other matters I want to go on to. All right, quickly. I know my time is I don't want to take up too much time from Mr. Mark. So that is what I wanted to say about that inquiry. And, you know, these are not our words in today's papers. You have Budram, who is a survivor, is saying the PM showed no sympathy. when he responded to our question on Friday. There's something that happened on the papers today, and I want to just touch a little bit on it. And you see, again, it's the willy-nilly aspect of this government. On today, in one of the dailies today, it's called the Orange Grove Solar Farm Eclipse. Young says, focus on Brechin Castle as government using land for a different project. Now, what this is about is a renewable solar park called the Lara project. Again, it's the willy-nilly of this government. All right? So they have been talking about solar farms in 2 areas in Trinidad and Tobago for the last 3 to 4 years. And it's called the Lara project. One is in Orange Grove, in my colleague, the member for St. Augustine, on lands that UWI is assigned. And the other farm is in Windsor Park in Pointe-a-Pierre constituency. This government doesn't even know that that second farm is in Pointe-a-Pierre constituency. They see the word Brechin Castle and they think it's in Coover South, but it is in Windsor Park in the Pointe-a-Pierre constituency. Now what I have been told, Mr. Mark, is that BP is very upset with this government because the government now has told BP, we're not doing any solar farm in Orange Grove anymore. After BP has spent millions of design work in the Orange Grove area, millions of dollars in the Orange Grove area, they have sent out a company who have sent out design work. The company is from UK. The company's name is, I think, Geotech or something like that. I have the right name, I'll get it just now. And BP is now asking whether or not this government is serious about renewable energy. Because you would have thought that when the government assigned those 2 areas, Orange Grove and Brechin Castle, Windsor Park, Pointe-a-Pierre, they would have done the work as far as the areas that they allocated. And BP would have thought so, and now BP has spent millions on design work that is now going up in smoke. And they have a concern with this government. The other area I want to just touch before I end, in 5 minutes or less, and I want to compliment Senator Mark and his opposition members last week. Mr. Mark last week on Tuesday in the Senate brought a motion as Private Members Day. And basically the motion in Private Members Day was what Mr. Mark brought was to ask this government to come clean, to be transparent about Dragon gas, report to the country, report to Parliament on a quarterly basis of what is taking place on this Dragon gas, right? And where over $100 million is to be spent. So what Senator Mark has called is for the government to provide a detailed account of its approach to this project involving entities such as Shell, National Gas Company, Venezuela, and the U.S. government. And be it further resolved that the government provide this Senate with quarterly reports on this critical, significant project. I want to really compliment Senator Mark. Because what transpired when the vote was taken after everybody debated, all the independent senators voted in favor with the opposition to have answers, transparency, and accountability be done by this government on the Dragon gas deal. So I think might be the first time, Senator Mark, that the independent senators voted with and in favor with the opposition members. That says a lot of what is happening in our country. And while that is what is so, it is so critical at the time that I don't know if Mr. Mark is very profound as a gentleman. Because yesterday, my colleague who is in front of me, trying to wind me up, yesterday, we see coming out of Venezuela, Mr. Mark, Venezuela court disqualifies the leading opposition presidential candidate. All right? So what that says, And then another article, it is not the opposition coming up with these articles, huh? Another article in the international news, the United States reviews Venezuela sanctions as Machado blocked from vote, meaning free and fair elections. That was one of the conditions that the sanctions were lifted by the United States government on Venezuela to ensure that they have free and fair elections. Now our role, and we are asking, how does this impact now on this Dragon Gas deal, Mr. Mark? And that is why Mr. Mark was so profound and the timing was correct when he debated that motion on Tuesday last. So ladies and gentlemen, I have given you 3 areas this morning. I've touched a bit on the heartlessness of this government in the Commission of Inquiry report and the compensation. We are calling for compensation for the families. We are calling as a first pass that the present board be removed and they are not part of this process of reviewing this report. We are asking Dr. Rowley, Prime Minister, to form a cabinet subcommittee to come up with recommendations to save the families, help the families that are coming out of this report. I've touched a bit on this renewable energy, the Orange Grove fiasco with BP, and I also touched a little bit on stay tuned of what is happening with our Dragon Gas issue and the Venezuelan government with free and fair elections. I understand that Prime Minister Rowley, I did not see Stuart Young in the Parliament on Friday. I don't know if he was advanced team and went up quickly when they got word about what is happening in Venezuela to try and talk to the United States government. Stuart Young was not in Parliament on Friday. I didn't see him, or somebody told me, I think Kevin was watching the Balize House opening. I didn't see him there either as the chairman, so maybe he left early to have some discussions with the United States government on this Dragon Gas and free and fair elections. So with those few words, I want to pass over to my esteemed colleague and profound Senator, the Honorable Wade Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you. General elections before the end of 2024. Well, we say to Dr. Rowley, bring it on. We are ready for you. You want to call a general elections? Snap. We are ready. This morning, I would like to raise 2 issues. One deals with the circulation of counterfeit $100 notes in our country. And then the second area we like to look at is what I would like to describe as a sellout of this country's national patrimony by this reckless and kleptocratic P&M administration. And therefore, the whole issue of the sale of the 56+% of CLICO shares in MHIL is an area that we would like to explore and analyze for the people's and in the people's interests. Now, members of the public and members of the media, we have been informed that there is a major counterfeit racket currently taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. And $100 bills, I should say, are currently in circulation. Population to wash these counterfeit $100 bills. Citizens are being impacted upon, as well as businesses, be they small, medium, or large. It is our understanding that the banks are also involved, the commercial banks, because citizens have extracted counterfeit notes from the commercial banks as well. Now, this is a very serious matter, and the government has remained silent after spending hundreds or maybe tens of millions of dollars in the new polymer currency, which is supposed to be plastic and unbreakable. So this is a matter that is of grave concern to the citizens of this country, and we call on the government to launch an immediate investigation into this matter, even if it means soliciting external expertise into this matter, so we can get to the bottom of this counterfeit conspiracy that we are facing at this time. So we call on the government of Trinidad and Tobago to intervene. We call on the governor of the central bank, the commissioner of police, to intervene in this particular counterfeit currency that is having obviously a negative impact on the people of our republic, especially small people, individual citizens, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and as I said earlier, even large businesses. So we call on the government to intervene and to take charge of this particular development and give the country some reassurance, and most importantly, get to those criminals who are involved in this counterfeit racket in our nation. Now, members of the media, members of the public, I would like to begin by addressing another important issue. I think my colleague David Lee talked about the government, we calling on the government to come clean on the Dragon Gas deal. Well, we are calling on the government, led by the Prime Minister, to come clean on the recent sale of the 56+% shareholding of CLECO in MHIL. This amount of shares, or these shares, I should say, were sold to Consolidated Energy Limited, which is a subsidiary of the Proman Group. So we are asking the government to come clean. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we were shocked when on the day after Boxing Day, Wednesday the 27th of December 2023, we read in the Trinidad Guardian on page 6 the following: government to sell MHIL shares to Proman. Here is it. We saw this. This is an unconfirmed report. No government minister, no prime minister, no minister of finance, no CLICO management, no governor of the central bank informed the population that our shares in MHIL amounting to 56.53% was sold to Consolidated Energy Limited. Members of the media, what is even more alarming is when you read this unconfirmed report, our shares were sold on Christmas Eve, when everyone was doing or engaging in Christmas happenings and activities. The government of Trinidad and Tobago sold or chose Christmas Eve to sell out the 56.53% shares that CLICO had in MHIL. Now, members of the media, you know what is troubling about this whole development? The minister in the Ministry of Finance, one Brian Manning, came to the Parliament in responding to a motion, a matter on the motion for the adjournment that I brought on behalf of the incoming UNC administration on this very matter of this MHIL and what the government was going to do with those shares, because we were being told that Consolidated Energy Limited, which I will now refer to as the Proman Group, had bought those shares. So we brought this matter to the Parliament. That is the incoming UNC administration. The junior minister, or I should say the minister in the Ministry of Finance, is on public record. I have the record here, if you wish to see it. He told the Parliament, he told Trinidad and Tobago, and he told the world in January, I believe, of 2023. No, it would have been in June, my error, in June 2023. You know what he told the world and he told the Parliament? He said that CLICO, by the way, members of the media and members of the public, the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago own 49% shareholding, or has 49% ownership in CLICO. remember this, we own 49% of CLECO. So what were we told? We were told by Mr. Brian Manning that they offered, for the third time, it was offered to that company called Consolidated Energy Limited, a subsidiary of the Proman Group. Because there's something called the Shareholders Agreement. And in that Shareholders Agreement, the Consolidated Energy Company that owns 43% of MHIL had the right of first refusal. That simply means that if you are going to sell, if CLECO is going to sell its shares, it must offer those shares firstly to Consolidated Energy Limited, which is a subsidiary of the Proman Group based in Switzerland. The CLECO management, executive management, offered those shares to Consolidated Energy Limited in 2017. Follow this carefully. In 2017, they did not take up those shares. Maybe they claim those shares were too high. The price, rather, for those shares were too high in 2017. So they didn't buy. In 2018, it was again offered to Consolidated Energy. We are told in this document, which I'll share with you, it's a central bank report, Kirk, that is, the central bank is compelled under the Central Bank Act, when it took control of CLECO, to apprise both the courts, the high courts of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Parliament of what was taking place with the sale of CLECO assets. It's a central bank report. We were told in this report that a second offer was made in 2018, but it was withdrawn. But we never knew why it was withdrawn. But it was withdrawn. And then this is where Mr. Brian Manning comes into the picture. A third offer was made to Consolidated Energy Limited in 2022, November 2022. Mr. Manning is on record as saying the Consolidated Energy Limited wanted to adjust the offered price. And they raised all kinds of extraneous matters, quantities, conditions, and prices which were outside the scope of the agreement. So what did the government do, Dr. Lee? What did the government do? CLECO owns those shares. So what CLECO did, CLECO then offered the shares to who? They offered the shares to the government. Which agencies in the government? Corporation Sole. They offered Corporation Sole 19%. And they signed off via sale and purchase agreement and transfer forms. That was in January of 2023. Then they offered in February NIF 17%. NIF is the National Investment Fund company. It's a state enterprise, 100% owned by the government. They offered them 17%. NIF accepted. Sign off sale and purchase agreement. Sign off transfer forms. That is what is on the public record. The only qualifier at that time, coming from the lips of the minister, was that the share register to make this thing legal and proper and to transfer everything properly to both Corporation Sole and NIF. They had to update the share register. That was outstanding. That is what he told us in the month of June. So we were shocked when we read this, because we were told, the last thing we were told by the minister in the Ministry of Finance was that Corporation Sole had bought 19% and NIF had bought 17%, which makes it 36%. Now you may ask, why 36% if they own 56.53%? The simple reason is that the government passed the Insurance Act in 2018, and that Insurance Act prohibited CLICO from owning more than 20% of any company outside of insurance and the financial services sector. That is why, under the law, CLICO had to dispose of 36%. So, here it is. They had to dispose of 36%. They sold this thing to, or they offered it, I should say, to this company called Consolidated Energy Limited. Well, that was previously. But in this instance that I'm making reference to, it was sold to Corporation Sole and it was sold to NIF. So we were quite surprised that come December the 27th, we understood that the government had sold not only the 36% that they were lawfully permitted to sell in accordance with the Insurance Act, but the government and CLICO is, government owns 49% of CLICO. They sold the entire 56.53% shares to Consolidated Energy Limited. Members of the media, you have to understand what is taking place with our patrimony. I want to refer you to page 68 of the December 31st, 2022 audited financial statements of CLICO. On page 68, we have valuations. What are the valuations? The valuations on page 68 reveal the following. At the end of 2021, the value that was placed on the 56.53% of the CLICO's shareholding in MHIL, according to the auditors, according to statements that are contained in the 2022 report, according to the valuation that was given at that time by the CLICO management, the value of the asset, the value of the shares of CLICO in MHIL was $2.6 billion. Members of the media, I wish to repeat this number because this figure is very important. If you have to understand this jigsaw puzzle that we are trying to put together, let us try to connect the dots. So we are told at the end of 2021, the value of the asset of the 56+% is $2.6 billion. Come 2022, we are told by CLICO management that, you know what? The value of the assets of CLICO is now $2.283 billion. Let me repeat that. In 2022, the value is $2.6 billion. And in 2022, based on some valuation report, they claim they received from some Charles River Associates, it went down to $2.283 billion. The auditors, KPMG, reported on page 4 of their 2022 report, that is the audited financial statements and report of CLICO, a difference of $323 million. And nobody can explain how an asset in 2021 valued at $2.6 billion all of a sudden drop to 2.283, and the auditors on page 4 raise a red flag. And you know what was the difference, Kirk? $323 million. So the government and CLICO have questions to answer. Why did you sell the people's assets at an undervalued price? That is the question that has to be asked. And you know what is even more important that we need to pay attention to, Kirk? It is our view that this valuation is flawed. Bear in mind, members of the media, I want you to follow me carefully. You see this report? This is a central bank report. They have been providing the parliament with this for years. You know who were the valuer of the MHIL shares before 2018? A reputable company called Duff and Phelps. They are the ones who have been valuing the asset, the shares of this company called CLICO, the shares of CLICO in MHIL. And they had it at 2.6. 2.6. Come 2018, a lady comes on the scene, becomes executive chairman. Her name is Claire Gomez Miller. And from 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, into 2022, the auditor was forced to submit a qualified opinion. You know why? When the auditor requested information to justify the valuation that was put to this particular asset, given the share ownership of 56+%. You know what they told the auditors? That there's a contempt of court order in existence. And that prohibits them, CLICO management, from sharing with their auditors the the techniques and the unobservable inputs that were used to determine the value of the asset of CLECO amounting to 56 plus in MHIL. And they did that, Kirk, in 18, in 19, in 20, in 21. But come 22, that order disappears. No mention is made of that order in the report of 2022. Where it is, we don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, we searched the notes. We went to this report here. We can't find it. So where is this order from the court? The minister came to the parliament and the minister said that this contempt of court order was under appeal. We cannot find that document. We don't know who are the parties involved. We don't know who brought contempt, the order to stop providing the auditors with the information that was required. We don't know. So, what is significant, and we want to bring it to your attention, is this. Why did the governor of the central bank, Dr. Alvin Hillier, allowed 5 consecutive qualified opinions to go unanswered? Why? We don't know. We don't know why he has done that. And what is even more important here is that the Prime Minister, in responding to a question from Dr. Munilal last Friday, David, indicated that the value that is sold our 56+% shares in MHIL to Consolidated Energy Limited amounted to $337 million, which is equivalent to 2.28 billion TT dollars. But you know what was even more strange, David? For the first time, we saw in this document, this newspaper article, where it is stated that technocrats from the Ministry of Finance was able to convince Consolidated Energy Limited to pay a dividend of $10 million US. So here what is going on. The Prime Minister comes to Parliament and says they got $337 million US for this particular asset. He goes on further to say that they got an additional $10 million US as dividends. How can dividends be conflated with the valuation of a property? Dividends is based on the profitability of a company. And who paid it? Was it the Proman Group or was it MHIL? No clarification on that whatsoever. So the Minister of Finance, Imbert, is telling us in Parliament that the valuation price is 2.4 billion. The Prime Minister is telling us in the Parliament that the valuation price is 2.28 plus a dividend of 10 million US. However you cut it, we have to go with the official statements in the reports that we have before us. into thin air. So they have to account. And I made the point earlier that this valuation that they claim was conducted by one Charles River Associates, and the Prime Minister was boasting of the experience of this company. But you know what is strange? In the central bank report, no mention is made of Charles Rivers Associates valuation report. None. No mention is made in the audited statements, financial statements of CLICO at the end of 2022. The governor of the central bank made no mention of Charles River Associates. So the question is, where is that valuation report that was produced by Charles River and Associates? It did not come to us in the parliament. We didn't see it. No mention is made in the report sent by the governor to the parliament. And the last report was at the end of December 2023. That was the last report we got. If that is the case, somebody has to account. In fact, the last report was December 31st, 2022. I beg your pardon. Is the governor guilty? Or should I put it another way? Has the governor of the central bank misled the courts of Trinidad and Tobago? Has the governor of the central bank misled the parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago? Because nowhere in his report to us, the parliament, I have a copy of it with me, here it is the name Charles Rivers Associate mentioned in this report. So where is this report? Where is this valuation report? Ladies and gentlemen, may I advise that the company that we are referring to is a profitable, valuable, and lucrative company. David, you would know this better than me. If you have controlling interest in a company, as how CLICO had in MHIL, and you are selling out your entire controlling interest, then you should get a premium price for your shares. There's no evidence of that. So that is a flaw in the valuation report. Do you know that this plant in Oman has a 25-year natural gas supply contract with the government of Oman? No disruption, no curtailment, a continuous flow of natural gas. That should account for something. Then they have an off-take arrangement with the government of Oman, or I think the German government, to take every ton of methanol that they produce. So they don't have no backlog. They don't have to go to no market. They have a monopoly in this area. So it's a very lucrative plant. And members of the media, the final thing I would like to tell you on this matter. Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. And during that period following the invasion, the price of methanol products skyrocketed, quadrupled. It went through the roof according to the Minister of Finance. So you want to tell me, David, that the value of the asset of the shares of CLICO, which was 2.6 billion in 2019, in 2020, In 2021, all of a sudden it went down to 2.283 billion. The same year, methanol prices increased fivefold. The value of the asset, the value of the shares, supposed to go up. But you know what happened? It went down by $323 million. Listen, CLECO management, you have to answer. You have to answer to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Where is that $323 million that the auditor talks about that is missing? Missing in the sense that there's a difference between 2.6 in 2021 and 2.83 in 2022. You have to account for that. And the Prime Minister has another question to answer. Prime Minister, did you have an audience with the CEO of Proman, of the Proman Group at the Diplomatic Center sometime in 2022? And if you did have a meeting with Proman, what did you all discuss? We call on the Prime Minister to produce all the official notes of that meeting, if such a meeting was held. And let us tell the country who else was in that meeting. Was Minister Young in that meeting? Let us know. Who else was in that meeting? And also, Mr. Prime Minister, you and Stuart Young flew to Switzerland in September 2023, David, when you had raised that point?
That's right.
2023 or sometime around there, you went to Switzerland. What did you go to Switzerland to discuss with the Proman Group? Did you go with any public officials? Did any public officials accompany you? Mr. Prime Minister, we demand that you produce for public consumption all the official notes of that encounter with Proman Group in Switzerland. So we want two sets of public notes from the Prime Minister. The one at the Diplomatic Center and the other one in Switzerland. You must be like Caesar's wife, above reproach. And in this instance, we have some issues that we want to bring to the attention of the nation. Mr. Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, CLECO Management, Governor of the Central Bank, if you all have nothing to hide, we are demanding this morning that you produce on your website immediately the following documents. The people need to get the following documents so that they can understand what has happened with their CLECO 56.53% shares in the MHIL. 1. We are demanding, David, that they produce immediately the shareholders agreement. We want the shareholders agreement to become a public document immediately. We are demanding a copy for public consumption of the sale and purchase agreement. That's the second document that we are demanding that the government make available. We are also demanding a copy of the valuation agreement between the parties. We demand that. If you have nothing to hide, and if you are committed to transparency and accountability, produce the valuation agreement. we are demanding that the Prime Minister produce and the Minister of Finance produce the valuation report. You said that you employed a gentleman or a company by the name of Charles River and Associates. We cannot see any report. We cannot see any reference to Charles Rivers and Associate. So if you have that report, Mr. Prime Minister, we demand that you table it on your website immediately so the public can have access to it. We want a copy of we want all transfer forms that were involved in this sale between Corporation Sol and CLECO. NIF and CLECO. We want all the transfer forms. And we want it between Consolidated Energy Limited and CLECO Management. And most importantly, we want the contempt of court order. If there's a contempt of court order, we are asking you to make it available to the public. We have tried, David, and we cannot find that contempt of court order. So we want the Prime Minister to release the contempt of court order. These are demands that we are making, and most importantly, the elephant in the room. The government must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago whether you have received the $1.1 billion that CLECO owes you, that you are supposed to receive, so that CLECO can be freed to go and do whatever it wishes to do, and release it release CLECO rather, under 44D of the Special Emergency Powers of the Central Bank. Can the Prime Minister, can the Governor of the Central Bank, can the management of CLECO, can the Minister of Finance tell Trinidad and Tobago whether the $1.1 billion that is owed to the taxpayers have been received, and when it was received? We need to get that information urgently from the government. And members of the public, we have a next step that we are prepared to take, but I will not alert you to that step at this time. We are calling on the government to make these documents available to the public immediately, urgently, and swiftly, if you have nothing to hide. And I want to issue a word of caution to former politicians who seem to be involved in this transaction, to be careful. To be very, very careful. We are seeing them all over the place. We are seeing them making statements all over the place. We want them to be very careful. Because you can be easily become part and parcel of a situation that has serious consequences. This is a warning and an advice at the same time. Members of the media, I think that this situation warrants action, because I would not like to believe, in closing, that there is a massive conspiracy with a lot of persons and organizations being complicit in this conspiracy to deliberately undervalue the shares of CLECO in an effort to give away that asset to Consolidated Energy Limited. I would just like to say, as I wrap up, I want to leave this with members of the media. You see this? This is the parent company. Proman, the Proman Group. This is the group that is heading towards the Privy Council, because as far as the High Court is concerned, they bought shares in Clico Energy Limited at an undervalued price in 2009, 2010. And the court ordered them to pay back every dividend with interest on those shares that were bought at an undervalued price. The Court of Appeal went further and accused this company, which is a subsidiary of the Proman Group, of committing fraud. This is a very serious matter. And that is why the government of Trinidad and Tobago had to be extremely careful in their negotiations with this company, because they have court documents that speaks to the issue of this company being involved in undervaluing of shares. And the Court of Appeal has accused this company of being involved in fraudulent activity. I say no more. This is a very serious matter. And we need answers from the government. We accuse no one so far. We have asked questions, we have raised issues, and everything I have said here today, there are documents to back up everything I have said. Everything. I am using factual data in order to submit my case for the public of Trinidad and Tobago. I now call on the government. I want to say in closing, Cleveland, without a vigilant opposition, this matter, without a vigilant opposition, this matter would have gone unanswered. This is an unconfirmed report, you know. The first time we learned that they sold the 56.53% Clico shares to Consolidated Energy Limited was when the opposition, the incoming UNC administration, raised this in the parliament last week, Tuesday. That was the first time we knew that the government and Clico management had officially sold our shares to this group called Consolidated Energy. And the other time we got to know about it was when the Prime Minister spoke in the Parliament on Friday. So had the UNC not been vigilant, had the incoming government of the people not watchful, they would have sold out our assets and we would not be the wiser. That is why we have called on the government to produce all those documents that we have called upon them to produce, so that every man, woman, and child would be able to determine whether this was a fair deal or whether it was a crooked deal. We need to get to the bottom of this matter. Ladies and gentlemen, I would pause. I want to apologize for taking so long. I have so much data and information on this matter. I can go on for the next 2 hours on this matter. It is so deep and so profound. So I'll pause at this time, and through the media, we have David Lee is here with us. I am here. Any questions that you wish to raise, any issues you wish to clarify, please feel free to do so. we are available to answer your queries and your questions.
Thank you, Senator Mark, for that insightful MHIL issue. And I know, Mr. Senator Mark, as you rightly said, you can go on for a few more hours because this is a very critical matter. And Senator Mark, I want to ask you, I don't know if you remember, the first time I knew something was amiss with this whole Proman issues when this government sold, there's a property around the savannah that used to have a restaurant called Apsara.
Yes, yes.
Right? And I think they sold that property, which was owned by NIB, to a Proman Group because they're going to build a state-of-the-art headquarters on that property. A few months ago, earlier this last year,
yes, I remember that.
That was a done deal.
Yes.
So I always ask myself, what was the reason that Proman wants to now come and build a state-of-the-art headquarters around the savannah? So you might be on good sound footing, Senator Mark. We are here, ladies and gentlemen, to have any questions from the media. I know the media is here.
Hi, good afternoon. Andrea Perez from the Guardian Media. The question is from Senator Mark. You spoke about the counterfeit issue, right? Has any commercial banks, have you confirmed that commercial banks have been receiving these counterfeits, or have you anybody in authority like CCS or anything?
What we have been told by our people on the ground is that they have gone to banks and they have received from banks the counterfeit note. And when they examine it properly, it is easily torn. You know, when you look at the polymer, it's difficult to tear it. But with those notes that have been circulated, they are easily torn. Now, the fact of the matter is that maybe these things are slipping through the cracks innocently. Whoever is producing these counterfeit notes, I mean, they say they are doing it they are very skillful and clever. And you and I and David and whoever could easily be victims of receiving those counterfeit notes. And therefore, I think it's Mr. Gary Aboud who alerted the nation through a video recently, because he operates a company called, what was the name of his company? Modern Life, right, somewhere in Europe, or I think, in Europe. No, he alerted us to that. And what we are doing is a public service today. We are saying to the government, that is out there, and we need you to investigate this matter and take action. And the commercial banks have to be extremely vigilant in not becoming part of the problem. So that is all we are saying. We are not saying that the central bank is part and parcel of any negative activity, because as I said, anyone could be easily taken or become victims of this particular counterfeit racket. That's all.
Just to add, Andrea, is that now that we are in the height of the carnival season, and we will have an influx of tourist foreigners to our nation, changing currency from whether it is yuan currency to TT currency, that is a time when you know the counterfeit issues tend to arise, because these foreigners won't be checking and wouldn't understand the bills. So it'd be very easy, and we are asking as a public announcement via Mr. Mark to be very vigilant, and we ask the government and the authorities to take note. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have two questions here to MP Louise. Based on the issues surrounding Carrier, is the opposition aware of any issues or a status on the Petrotrin refinery?
Well, coming out of Paria, one of the media would have asked, and really and truly, you know, that's the white elephant in the room, the whole Petrotrin fiasco. If Petrotrin wasn't shut down and you ran away OWTU, you know what, the tragedy that took place nearly 2 years ago might not have taken place because of the high standard that the union would have invoked to ensure the safety of workers and so forth. We have been asking what's the status of that. From what information I have, there has been a company that has put forward a proposal. Again, it is on the desk, I think, of the Minister of Energy, and it's languishing there, and hopefully, we might hear something from the Minister of Energy as you raise it now, and so we will see, what takes place to come in the next couple of months.
Okay, one other question. Is the opposition of the view that it is the government who should lead the implementation of compensation for the families through a cabinet subcommittee?
Well, I made that in my presentation this morning. We are not in agreement with this present board adjudicating on that Commission of Inquiry report in respect of even whatever recommendations are there, even as far as compensation or even from safety issues, because it cannot be business as usual that is being continued at Paria under the same present board and management. So I have called, the opposition is calling that maybe the Prime Minister sets up a subcommittee of cabinet to come up with recommendation in a fair and equitable manner for the families, the divers who lost their lives in this tragedy, because it happened in one of our state companies, a company that is very profitable based on the financial statements that are there in the public's domain. It is there. So I really hope that, Mr. Mark, we don't see like what happened with a company called EFCL, yes, education company that this present company wound up, yes, to avoid paying contractors whatever outstanding liabilities that they owed contractors. I really hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. May I just say, in closing, that NIF 2, the minister has floated. The question here, David, is this. You have a lucrative asset in MHIL, with CLECO owning 56%. Under the Insurance Act, there are provisions where the government could have approached the governor of the central bank for more time before they dispose of those shares. The government could have even amended the law that compels CLECO to dispose of those shares. Why did the government not exercise those options so that the people of Trinidad and Tobago could have used the assets of CLECO's shareholding in MHIL to back up NIF 2, so that you will have, for instance, bonds being issued at a really high rate of interest because this company called MHIL is a profitable and valuable company, and the asset is only going to grow and expand. Why did the government choose to sell out to foreign interests the entire 56.53 and leave CLECO naked with zero, and leave the people naked with zero, and leave the country naked with zero? Why, Dr. Rowley? Why, Mr. Imbert? Why, Governor of the Central Bank? Why did you all not think about putting CLECO's shares in the hands of the people through NIF 2 that the minister is promoting? That is a point I just want to add to that.
Excellent point, Mr. Mark. I really hope as we come to an end of this morning's presser that the media, we have raised several critical areas to the media. I think what Senator Mark might have to do a motion, again a private motion, calling for transparency and accountability and come clean with the population on this whole MHIL share issue. And maybe again, we're hoping that given your powerful motion that was brought this week, that the independent senators will vote once again with the opposition when it comes to accountability for the country. So before I end, there are two issues. Simple. One is we would like, on behalf of the opposition and myself and Senator Mark, we would like to congratulate our West Indies cricket team for winning a resounding close fight in Australia. It was very,
very good, man.
Very good.
Congratulations,
West Indies can win
yes,
that
man.
test match. So
very good,
I think we are even 1-1. We are
very
even
good.
1-1.
Very
and
good.
we look forward to the next test match. Right?
Excellent, excellent,
and,
excellent.
Before we end, to the media who is here, Andrea, tomorrow evening from 6 p.m., the opposition leader and her team will be hosting our second anti-crime meeting. Will be held at the Naparima Boys College Auditorium from 6 p.m. We will be in South San Fernando tomorrow, Senator Mark. We will have a bumper crowd. We have a great setup panel. The moderator will be led by the opposition leader, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar. So we had our first meeting in St. Joseph in La Jolla. Tomorrow we'll have our second anti-crime meeting in San Fernando at the Naparima Boys College Auditorium at 6 p.m. So we ask you, come out and hear, come out and lend your voice in our anti-crime discussions that this government, led by the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley as Prime Minister, does not want to meet with the opposition to have any discussions on crime. So we have taken it to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Before we close, I do not know if you heard Kevin or my brother David, that when the Prime Minister addressed his Balize House crowd yesterday, he talked about he want to resign, he want to leave politics, or he want to retire and join his wife who has just retired and so on. Listen, if that is what he said, we say good riddance. We want the Prime Minister to go earlier. He has committed, and his legacy of shame, he has established a legacy of infamy, and his legacy is one of bloodshed. Would you believe that under 9 years, under his watch, close to 5,000 citizens of this country have been murdered? And he thinking about retiring? Listen, we want the Prime Minister to leave, and he wants to call a snap election. We say bring it on.
Okay, Mr. Mark, thank you again. So thank you for listening to us this morning. Again, tomorrow, as I said, we'll have our anti-crime meeting, and later in the week, we'll have another presser. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for viewing. Good morning and good evening. Have a blessed day.